Why was it always the eyes? That's what they noticed first. That's what they mocked when they thought she couldn't hear. A squint, a tilt of the head, a hesitation as though the world 6 feet in front of her was always half a puzzle. They laughed softly, but not softly enough. Warrant Officer Vance walked across the blistering gravel of forward operating base Paragan as though each step carried its own weight. The sun cut into her like knives, the air a furnace of grit and diesel. Soldiers younger than her, sharp-eyed, restless, convinced they'd already seen everything, stepped aside too quickly when she passed. Not respect, not deference, just the kind of uneasy pity reserved for someone who looked like they might stumble at any second. "Can she even see the mess hall?" one muttered half under his breath. "Four eyes in waiting," another whispered back, a smirk, a snicker. She heard them, she always heard them. But she didn't react. Their words didn't wound her, not in the way they thought. To her, sound was just another data point. The crunch of boots on gravel, the groan of rusted hinges in the wind, the faint metallic whine of a generator nearing failure. Their mockery slid into that same category: noise, distracting, irrelevant. What mattered were the things no one else noticed. The hairline cracks in a concrete barrier, the uneven wear on a Humvee's tires that hinted at unscheduled patrols over hostile terrain, the vibration of a rivet on a tower brace, one good gust away from snapping loose. They thought she couldn't see. They had no idea how much she saw. Her arrival was a question mark none of them bothered to answer. Warrant officers were specialists: aviation, intelligence, ordnance, masters of a craft, but her file, a blank slate, a black hole, and her posting here was a strange one: not operations, not combat, but logistics and analysis. A clerk's desk at the heart of the Tactical Operations Center. To the men who ran Paragan, that made her nothing. A mistake in the paperwork. A body sent to rot in the desert. Her quarters were proof of it. Just a metal container with a cot bolted to the wall, the air heavy with dust and diesel. She unpacked with surgical precision, her movements as mechanical as if she'd rehearsed them 100 times. No family photos, no letters, no mementos, just uniforms, one small stack of civilian clothes, and a single heavy Pelican case, black and locked, slid beneath the cot. When she sat down, the mattress creaked like it resented her weight. She closed her eyes, but closing them never meant darkness. For her, the world never went away. It was always there, too much of it, light and shadow and noise bleeding together into something overwhelming. Squinting wasn't an effort to see. It was an effort to see less. She had been sent here to disappear, forgotten by design, a relic from something that was supposed to no longer exist. And yet, even relics had purpose, especially in a place where one mistake could bury everyone. The base lived in constant tension. You could taste it in the clipped radio chatter, feel it in the hurried footsteps across catwalks, see it in the way every eye always drifted toward the mountains ringing the horizon. Mountains like jagged teeth, always waiting, always watching. And through it all, Vance missed nothing. When she finally stood before Colonel Maddox, she already knew what she would hear. His office was neat in the way of men who needed control, medals aligned by ruler, citations spaced with perfect geometry. He was a man carved from rigidity. His pale blue eyes flicked from the single sheet of her file to her face, already dismissing her before she'd spoken. "Warrant Officer Vance." His voice was clipped, dry. He didn't offer her a seat. "I've reviewed your transfer orders and your file. What little there is of it." A pause, a tap of his finger against the paper. "Sparse, almost deliberately so, but your physical evaluation wasn't. It flags significant visual acuity deficiencies." His gaze hardened. "This is a forward operating base. I don't have time for personnel who can't pass a vision test. Frankly, I don't know why command sent you here." It wasn't hostility in his tone. It was worse. The weary irritation of a man forced to deal with an inconvenience. She wasn't a soldier to him. She was a broken piece of equipment dumped on his desk. She met his eyes without blinking. Her voice, when it came, was calm, steady. My orders are to analyze operational data and provide logistical support assessments, Colonel. My eyesight is sufficient for the duties assigned. He let the word hang, mocking. Sufficient. His lips twitched into a humorless smile. For a desk job, perhaps, very well. There's a terminal in the logistics section. Stay out of the way of my operations team. Do your reports. Don't create problems. Dismissal, pure and absolute. He had put her in a box and sealed it shut. When she turned to leave, the young captain at his side smirked openly. The message was clear. To them, she was already a non-factor. Her desk in the TOC was proof of it, a lonely corner shoved between a humming server rack and a pile of dusty manifests. She felt the eyes on her as she sat down, whispered jokes, side glances, quiet conclusions already made. But she began her work. Not the work they thought, spreadsheet after spreadsheet of fuel consumption and ammunition resupply. She did that too, enough to stay invisible. But the real work was elsewhere. The TOC was a living organism, and from her forgotten corner, she mapped its pulse. She memorized the rhythm of radio operators' voices, knew which ones bent under stress before their words betrayed them. She traced the streams of information flashing across screens, saw which feeds drew eyes, which were habitually ignored. She tracked human currents, the captain clinging to Maddox's favor, the master sergeant quietly holding the place together, the young corporal at the comms station whose sharp eyes strayed toward the margins no one else cared about. Corporal Sophia Rossi. Rossi moved differently, efficient, observant, and unlike the others she didn't mock, she watched, curious, measuring. In her off hours Vance walked, not for exercise, not for boredom, for reconnaissance. Her slow circuits of the base perimeter became routine, but in her mind every step was data, distances measured by her own stride, sightlines traced from tower to tower, blind spots logged, soil crumbled in her hand, catalogued for how it would shift under tires or shatter under impact. The sun's arc across the wire, the shadows that grew and shrank, the way the wind funneled between jagged peaks. All of it stored away. The guards thought she was restless. They were wrong, she was preparing. One afternoon near the western fence line, she stood watching the mountains when Rossi approached with a steaming mug. "Coffee, ma'am." The voice was soft, respectful. "Thank you, Corporal." Vance took it, her fingers curling around the warmth. Rossi hesitated, then gestured toward the horizon. "The view gets old after a while." Vance tilted her head, eyes fixed on the jagged ridges. "The view changes, every hour, every minute." She nodded toward a rock formation jutting like a fist. At 1600 its shadow covers the riverbed approach, a perfect infiltration route, but in the morning it's a death trap. Rossi stared, her sharp eyes trying to catch what Vance saw, but she couldn't, not yet. "I never thought of it like that," Rossi admitted softly. "Most people don't." Vance handed the empty mug back and walked away, leaving Rossi with a new awareness pressing heavy on her chest. The woman with the bad eyes wasn't blind. She was reading a world no one else knew how to read. And in that quiet, constant reading, there was something unsettling, something that felt like more than habit, expertise. The base wasn't a home to Vance. It was a chessboard, and she was learning the pieces. Night fell hard in Paragan. The valley swallowed the sun and left only the hum of generators and the watchful glow of towers. In her cot, Vance lay awake, her mind replaying every sound, every angle of light, every shift of the wind. She didn't need rest the way others did. Rest was a luxury for those who could afford to be unprepared. Because she knew, sooner or later, purpose would find her. It always did. And when it did, all their whispers, all their pity, all their certainty about her weakness would collapse in an instant. They thought she was a clerk, a defect, a woman with bad eyes. But they hadn't seen her yet, not really. Not the way the world would, when the first shot rang out. What happens when the whispers stop being whispers? When the mocking jokes dry in the throat, because the air suddenly tastes like fear. The moment began like static, just a flicker on the radio net. One word. Contact. The hum of the Tactical Operations Center broke. Voices that had been calm, routine, suddenly tightened. Chairs scraped. Boots shuffled. The quiet rhythm of order became the erratic heartbeat of panic. A patrol, call sign Nomad Actual, was pinned down, 10 clicks out, on a ridge scarred by rock and shadow. The voice of their sergeant came sharp through the speakers. Taking effective fire, fortified position on the eastern face. Range extreme, we're suppressed, requesting support. The map screen blinked to life, a red diamond glowing against the ridgeline. In the TOC, every set of eyes turned toward it. Maddox stood, jaw tight, his voice cutting across the chaos. Enemy position. Negative, the patrol leader gasped through the radio. We can't fix, he's dug in, heavy caliber, extreme range. The words fell like stones. The designated marksman on the patrol tried to return fire. A sharp crack rang through the comms. A shot answered, deeper, heavier, echoing like thunder. Then a scream. Marksman down, scope shattered, he's hit, we're blind out here. Panic threaded through the TOC like smoke. Fingers flew over keyboards, analysts begging drones and satellites for a visual. Too slow, too late. Every 90 seconds, another shot. Each one chewing at the rocks protecting Nomad Actual, each one closing in. Maddox's voice snapped like a whip. Air support. Closest Apache 20 minutes out, sir. QRF. 30 to mount, another 15 to reach them. 45 minutes, the patrol had 10, maybe less. The red diamond on the map pulsed, each pulse a heartbeat, each heartbeat a countdown to silence. And in the corner of the room, the forgotten woman sat utterly still. Vance's eyes closed, she tilted her head. She wasn't watching the screens, she was listening. The sharp crack of Nomad's M110, the heavy echo of the enemy's weapon, the time between, the way sound bounced off canyon walls. She mapped it all in her mind, a model of echo and distance, angles and voids. The room around her frayed, desperate chatter, fear, orders barked into radios. But inside her head, everything slowed, 90 seconds between shots. He wasn't just firing, he was breathing, he was hunting. Her eyes opened, blurred lights, blurred faces, but her mind was crystal clear. She stood. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, just movement, deliberate, absolute, enough to cut through the panic. She walked from her corner straight toward Maddox. The colonel was packing like a man chained to disaster. She stepped in front of him. "Colonel," her voice wasn't raised, but it sliced through the room like a blade. "Give me a rifle." The silence that followed wasn't real silence. It was disbelief holding its breath. Maddox stopped, his eyes narrowed, his face hardening into fury. "What did you just say, warrant officer?" The young captain beside him snorted, shaking his head. "She wants a rifle, sir," he laughed under his breath. "The blind woman wants to shoot." Whispers hissed through the TOC, carried on the same air that had once carried mockery. But this time it wasn't quiet cruelty. It was incredulous, sharp-edged. Vance ignored them all. Her unfocused gaze stayed locked on Maddox. Her voice didn't waver. "The M107A1 from the armory lockup," she said, "and a spotter." Her head turned, sweeping across stunned faces until it found Rossi, knuckles white on the comms console. You'll do." Maddox's face went red. His authority was being challenged in front of his own men. His instinct was to shut it down, to throw her out. But then the radio crackled again. "We're losing cover, he's zeroing us, we can't move, we need fire support now." The desperation in that voice was raw. It sliced through Maddox's pride and left only the weight of responsibility. His men were dying. He ground his teeth, then spat the words like a curse. "Fine, get her the rifle, get her on the roof, but this is on your head, Vance. You fail and your career is over." It wasn't a warning, it was a promise. She nodded once, sharp, certain, and walked toward the armory cage. The armorer, a grizzled sergeant with trembling hands, unlocked the rack, his eyes wide with disbelief as he handed her the Barrett M107A1, a monster of steel and recoil, nearly 5 feet long, 30 pounds of punishment. She lifted it like it was nothing, movement smooth, familiar. "Let's go," she said to Rossi. The corporal grabbed a rangefinder and scope, scrambling to follow as Vance strode for the ladder to the roof. Soldiers fell in behind, some out of duty, most out of curiosity. They expected to watch a failure, a spectacle. The woman with the bad eyes was about to humiliate herself. The sun blazed as they stepped onto the gravel roof. Wind whipped grit into their faces. Vance didn't hesitate. She moved to the parapet facing the mountains, dropped the rifle to its bipod, and then did something none of them expected. She pulled the Pelican case from her bag, snapped the latches. Inside, gleaming steel, lenses layered like glass armor, microprojectors angled toward her pupils. A custom-built optics system. She slid it over her face, blinked once, and the world snapped into focus. The haze, the blur, the chaos of too much information gone, replaced by terrifying clarity. The mountains weren't shadows anymore. They were textures, details, the grit of shale, the bend of scrub in the wind, the shimmer of heat rising off rock. The world wasn't a puzzle anymore. It was a target. The soldiers who'd followed fell silent. The jokes died in their throats. Their smirks dissolved into stillness, because what stood before them wasn't a broken clerk fumbling with a weapon. It was something else, something they didn't have a name for. Vance loaded a round. The metallic slam of the bolt echoed like finality. She settled behind the weapon, her body molding to the steel like it had always belonged there. "Range corporal," she murmured. Rossi swallowed, lifted the rangefinder with shaking hands. 1850 meters, ma'am. Wind 10 knots, 2 o'clock. Gasps behind them. Impossible distance. Impossible conditions for anyone else. But Vance wasn't anyone else. "Winds 12 at apex," she corrected softly. "Thermal lift at 2 mils elevation. Third outcropping from the left." Rossi squinted. She saw only rock, nothing, but Vance saw everything. She lowered her eye to the scope, drew in a slow breath, stilled her body until she seemed carved from stone. 90 seconds, the enemy would fire again. The watchers held their own breath. The rifle roared, a sound that ripped the sky open, slammed against their chests. Dust exploded from the bipod. The bullet's journey stretched time. 2 seconds, 2 heartbeats, then. "Target down," the radio screamed with disbelief. "Direct hit, he's gone. Where the hell did that shot come from?" On the roof, mouths hung open. Private Tanaka, one of the worst of the mockers, stared pale-faced between the mountain and Vance, his stomach twisting with shame. He hadn't just been wrong, he'd been blind. In the TOC, Maddox gripped a console, his face white. The woman he'd dismissed had just done the impossible. But relief lasted only a breath. Another crack ripped across the valley. Another heavy round slamming near Nomad's position. "There's another one," the radio cried. "Different position, we're still taking fire." The silence that followed was heavier than the first. This wasn't one shooter, it wasn't luck. It was a team, professional, coordinated, deadly. Rossi swept her scope across the ridge, panic rising in her voice. "I can't see him. Too much shadow, no muzzle flash, no dust." But Vance was already moving. She didn't relax after the first shot. She simply reset. Her optics filtered light, red heat, sifted shadows. To anyone else, the ridgeline was a smear of gray. To her it was a language, a code. There. Not a flash, not movement. A cold patch, too cold. A shadow that didn't match the rock. A thermal blanket, clever but flawed. "Got him," she whispered, flat, certain. "Negative," Rossi stammered. "I don't see anything." "He's in the shadow. 9 or 20 meters, west outcropping. The soldiers shifted uneasily. 1850 was impossible. 1920 was myth. The wind gusted harsher now. She adjusted clicks on the scope, murmuring calculations like prayers: spin drift, gravity arc, thermal lift. Her body stilled. The rifle thundered. 2.5 seconds, eternity. Then target neutralized, confirmed hit. Foley's voice burst from the radio, awestruck. Who is that shooter? Is that Angel One? I repeat, Angel One active. The call sign dropped like a stone into silence. Angel One, a ghost, a legend whispered in secret. On the roof, every soldier turned toward Vance. Even Maddox froze in the TOC, his face draining of color. He knew the name. He knew the ghost story behind it. And in that instant, they all understood. The woman with the bad eyes was no clerk. She was something else. Something they thought didn't exist anymore. Who was she? That was the question that swallowed the roof in silence. The smoke of her second shot still hung in the wind. The echoes still rolled off the mountains. But every soldier standing there knew what they had just witnessed wasn't luck. It wasn't chance. It was mastery, precision carved from impossibility. And the word over the radio kept ringing in their ears. Angel One. On the valley floor, the patrol was alive. Shaken, bruised, but alive. Evac birds were inbound, scooping them out before another unseen threat could strike. For them, relief came as disbelief. For the men on the roof, it came as something heavier, something closer to awe. Private Tanaka, whose jokes had once been quick, now stood stiff and pale, eyes locked on the weapon that lay in Vance's hands. He had mocked her eyes, mocked her gait, mocked her very presence. But now, confronted with the truth, shame burned through him like acid. Corporal Rossi knelt beside her, frozen, staring not at the mountains but at the woman who had just bent physics into obedience. Rossi had believed in her in some small way, but even she hadn't understood the depth, the calm precision, the terrifying silence of her certainty. And then the ladder rattled. Boots hammered up the rungs. Colonel Maddox appeared on the roof, the wind clawing at his uniform. His face was carved from disbelief, his rigid authority shaken to its core. He had watched it all through Rossi's scope feed, watched the impossible shots land, watched his own assumptions turn to dust. Now he stood face to face with the ghost he thought he'd buried under paperwork. Angel One, he said, not a question, a statement. His voice was tight, stripped of arrogance. Vance didn't look up from her work. Her hands moved calmly, wiping the rifle down, breaking it apart piece by piece, as though she'd just finished routine maintenance at the range. Maddox's breath came sharp. That was your call sign, Project Chimera, Hawkeye Vance. The name shivered across the roof like a chill wind. Tanaka stiffened. Rossi blinked. Soldiers shifted uneasily. They had all heard fragments of the myth, the whispered rumors told by older men in the barracks late at night. A sniper who could make shots no one else believed possible. A ghost who could vanish into shadows, move without support, live weeks in hostile terrain. They had dismissed it all as stories, exaggerations, folklore. But the ghost stood before them now, assembling rifle parts with calm, deliberate hands. Vance finally looked up. Her eyes, hidden behind the layered glass of her optic system, were unreadable. Her voice came level. That program was decommissioned, Colonel. Decommissioned? Maddox let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Buried, more like. They stripped your rank, classified your existence, and sent you here to count boxes. His jaw tightened, fury rising not at her but at the machine that had wasted her. You were their best asset, and they broke you. The truth pressed in on him like weight. Her medical file, the flagged vision deficiency, it wasn't weakness. It was aftermath, a side effect of the very thing that made her extraordinary, the experimental neural interface, the system that allowed her to process visual data beyond human limits. Without her glasses, the world was too much, an endless flood of sensory input. a storm of light and shadow no brain should endure. It wasn't that she couldn't see. It was that she saw too much. And the military, in its blind pursuit of utility, had shattered their own weapon, then locked her away. "They threw you in a box," Maddox murmured, his voice hollow, "and forgot you." Vance slid the bolt back into the receiver, smooth, quiet. Her silence was an answer in itself. Around them, soldiers watched, faces pale, eyes wide, caught between awe and shame. They had thought they were standing over a clerk fumbling through punishment duty, but they had been standing over a legend. Maddox swallowed hard. "You saved my men," his words cracked. "2 rounds, that's all it took, and he stopped, looked at her again, not her file, not her eyes, her. The weight of his own arrogance pressed down. When she finally rose, rifle broken down and strapped away, the wind pulled at her hair, dust stung her face, but she moved like the storm couldn't touch her. Maddox stepped back without meaning to. The base's hierarchy shifted in that moment. Something invisible, something unspoken. They descended the ladder, Maddox trailing behind her like a man walking through a dream. Inside the TOC, chatter dulled to silence the second she entered. Men at consoles froze, half-typed reports blinking on their screens. Operators turned. Eyes followed her. No pity now, no mockery. Just something heavier. Awe, confusion, respect. She crossed the floor to the armory cage, returned the rifle. No words, no explanation. She was already the quiet analyst again, the squinting woman in the corner with her blurred screens, but everything had changed. Private Tanaka stood near the ladder, his posture stiff, his face pale. When she passed him, he snapped to attention so sharply it startled even himself. His chest tight, his voice locked. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His shame and his apology were written in the rigidity of his spine. She didn't break stride, she didn't nod, she didn't need to. The silence of her presence was heavier than any reprimand. Maddox followed into the TOC. His boots echoed against the floor. He didn't bark orders, didn't call for reports. He walked to the center of the room, turned and faced her. For a long moment, he simply looked. His pale eyes carried gratitude, remorse, and something harder, respect that burned through his pride. Then, in a gesture that froze every soldier in place, Colonel Maddox clicked his heels together, brought his hand up, and delivered a slow, deliberate salute. A colonel does not salute a warrant officer. Not unless the world has turned upside down. But Maddox saluted her. It wasn't protocol, it was confession, it was apology, it was reverence. And in that moment, the TOC held its breath. Vance's face didn't change, but in her eyes behind the lenses something flickered, surprise, maybe acceptance. She didn't return the salute, that would have been a breach too deep. Instead, she gave a single nod, small, dignified, final. The message was clear. Respect was earned, and it was hers now. The rhythm of the bass shifted that night. Paragan breathed differently. The whispers that once carried mockery were gone, replaced by quiet distance, the kind you gave to someone you weren't sure how to approach. She returned to her terminal, screen still blurred. Her fingers tapped reports as if nothing had changed, but it had, for everyone. Rossi approached quietly, placing a steaming mug beside her. No words of pity, no awkwardness, just a simple offering. "Coffee, ma'am," Rossi said softly. Vance glanced up, saw the young woman's steady presence. A corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Thank you, Corporal." It was small, but it carried weight. Rossi nodded and returned to her post. The bond between them had shifted too, not superior and subordinate, something deeper, earned trust. On the perimeter, guards rotated. Tanaka climbed his tower post, but his movements were different now, focused, careful. His eyes scanned the dark with new discipline. His hands checked bolts and rivets. He wasn't passing time anymore. He was guarding. Because he had seen what blindness really looked like, and it wasn't hers. It was his own. The desert cooled, the day's heat bleeding into the night. Inside the TOC, only the hum of servers filled the silence. Vance sat at her desk, the Pelican case locked under her cot, her glasses folded away. Her squint returned, her eyes blurred. The world was too much again, but she didn't need the clarity tonight. She was the ghost in plain sight once more. And yet, for the first time, she wasn't invisible. She had been seen, truly seen. And that was its own kind of danger. What happens when the ghost refuses to vanish? When the story you told yourself, that she was broken, that she was irrelevant, no longer fits, no matter how tightly you try to force it. At forward operating base Paragan, silence became its own language after that day. No one mocked anymore, no one whispered. When Warrant Officer Vance crossed the TOC floor, the sea of bodies shifted instinctively, giving her space. Not out of disdain, not anymore, out of something heavier, deference. And yet they didn't know what to do with her. Respect didn't erase discomfort. Awe didn't erase fear. If she was Angel One, then she wasn't just another soldier. She was something else. Something too big, too dangerous, too untouchable. So they spoke less when she was near. They watched her out of the corners of their eyes. They lowered their voices as though she were listening to things they didn't want her to hear. But she always heard. She didn't blame them. She didn't expect trust. Trust wasn't built overnight. It was earned over time, piece by piece, in the quiet places where no one was watching. So she went back to her corner, to the blurred screens, to the endless rhythm of supply reports and logistics chains. But no one looked at her desk the same way again. Colonel Maddox carried the weight hardest. His salute still hung over him like an unhealed wound. He hadn't just acknowledged her skill, he'd confessed his own blindness, and a man like Maddox didn't forgive himself easily. He avoided her for days, issued orders through aides, kept his words clipped, professional, stripped of tone. He didn't dare mock her again, but he didn't dare look her in the eyes either. The burden shifted onto her shoulders too. Once she'd been invisible. Now eyes tracked her, respectful, cautious, expectant. And with each glance came the question unspoken, what else could she do? She hated that question, because every answer risked pulling her deeper into the light she had tried so long to leave behind. At night in her container room, she sat on the edge of her cot with the black Pelican case at her feet. Her fingers traced its edges, her thoughts circling the truth she carried. She wasn't supposed to open it again. Not here. Not ever. She promised herself she'd let the past rot quietly in some forgotten desert. But the desert had a way of remembering. And the more the base leaned on her silence, the more she felt the pull of that weight. Corporal Rossi broke the solitude more often now, always careful, always respectful, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with a quiet report, sometimes with nothing more than her presence, a steady anchor in the current of noise. "You saw things no one else did," Rossi said one evening, leaning on the edge of the comms desk, her eyes flicking toward the mountains that loomed black under starlight. That day, it wasn't just skill, it was something else, like you knew where he'd be before he did. Vance's gaze stayed forward, unfocused. Her voice came quiet. "It's not knowing, it's listening. The world always tells you what it's about to do, most people don't hear it." Rossi frowned, her sharp young face creasing with thought. "And you hear everything." "No," Vance's tone shifted, soft, almost bitter. "I hear too much." She didn't explain. She didn't have to. Rossi saw the truth in the way Vance squinted at her blurred screen, the way her hand sometimes hovered above the keyboard before striking keys with perfect rhythm. Not hesitation, calibration, the constant battle of filtering an overwhelming flood. It wasn't weakness, it was survival. The weeks that followed were quieter, but not calmer. The bass settled into its rhythm again, but with an undercurrent of tension that hadn't existed before. Not from the enemy, from within. Maddox issued orders differently now. His voice, once rigid, carried a subtle restraint when she was in the room. Officers weighed decisions against the presence of the woman in the corner. Soldiers on the perimeter scanned with more diligence, Tanaka among them, no longer careless with his hours on watch. She hadn't intended to change them. She hadn't spoken a word to lecture them. But her silence had done what authority never could. It had taught them to see differently. And yet respect came with its own danger. The requests began, subtle at first, a lieutenant dropping a file on her desk, asking if she'd mind glancing over the patrol routes, a sergeant wondering aloud if she had any thoughts on the fuel convoy timings. They told themselves it was just analysis, just logistics, but they weren't asking the woman with the blurred eyes. They were asking the ghost they now knew she was. Every request was a step closer to the past she had buried. She gave them what they asked for in careful doses. Enough to help, not enough to reveal. Her mind mapped the terrain, cataloged vulnerabilities, traced patterns of movement. She gave suggestions without explanation, answers without revealing the method. And each time their respect deepened. But so did the weight on her chest. One evening Maddox came to her container. He didn't knock. He stood in the doorway, shadowed by the fatting sun. "I don't know who you are anymore," he said, his voice low, stripped of its usual bark. "I don't know why command buried you. I don't know why you're here, but I do know this." His eyes, pale and hard, softened. "You saved my men. You made me look blind, and for that I owe you something." Vance didn't move from her cot, didn't look up. Her fingers rested on the Pelican case. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "That's where you're wrong." Maddox's jaw tightened. "I owe you honesty. You don't belong in that corner, and you don't belong buried under my silence." He turned to leave, but his final words lingered in the doorway. "If you ever want your name back, you'll have it. All you have to do is ask." But she didn't ask. She didn't want her name back. Names came with chains, and she'd worn enough chains in her life. When the door closed, the case seemed heavier at her feet. She whispered to the silence, words no one else would hear, "I'm not Angel One anymore." But the desert, uncaring, didn't believe her. Because just days later, the quiet broke again. Not with a word, not with static, with something colder. The drone feed caught it first, a convoy ambushed in the canyon west of the base, IEDs hidden in the sand, RPGs cracking against armored steel, smoke curling into the air, voices screaming through the net. Maddox shouted orders. The TOC roared back to life. But in the corner, Vance's body stilled, her head tilted, her eyes closed. Because there was something about the canyon, something about the way the enemy moved, the rhythm of their fire, the placement of their ambush. It wasn't random. It wasn't opportunistic. It was calculated, precise. And the calculation was too familiar. Her breath caught in her throat. There was something she hadn't told them, not yet. The enemy out there, they weren't just fighters. They weren't just insurgents. They were trained, professional, the kind of train that mirrored her own past. And she knew, in the pit of her chest, why the desert had dragged her back into the light. Because ghosts don't vanish, they find each other. How do you fight the mirror of yourself? That was the question clawing at her chest, as the radio screamed with fractured voices. The canyon was a trap. The convoy had rolled out under clear orders, a simple resupply run. Routine. Safe as anything in this desert could be, but routine was the easiest thing to predict. The blast of the first IED tore steel apart. The second swallowed dust and flame, splitting the formation into chaos. Then came the RPGs, slamming against armor, rocking vehicles from their treads. Convoy under fire, Canyon West sector. The transmission cut through the TOC, jagged, panicked. Maddox barked orders, his voice loud enough to drown fear. "Get me eyes on that canyon. Push the drones." On the big screens, the feeds came alive, grainy bird's-eye views of chaos. Smoke coiling. men scrambling for cover, tracers arcing like fireflies. To most in the room it looked like confusion, random violence, but to Vance it was too clean. Her head tilted, her body went still, her unfocused eyes flickered across the blur. They weren't hitting vehicles at random. They were isolating them, cutting the convoy into pieces. They weren't wasting RPGs. Each one was aimed at choke points, timing perfect, suppression here, advance there. This wasn't insurgency. It was doctrine, professional, deliberate. And doctrine didn't come from ragged fighters with hand-me-down rifles. Her hand tightened on the desk. Maddox didn't see it yet. His orders came rapid fire. QRF mobilization, air support scrambling, medevac choppers rerouted. His men moved fast, but not fast enough. The canyon was bleeding seconds, and seconds meant lives. Rossi's voice shook as she relayed comms, her knuckles white against the headset. Eagle 2 reports pinned down, multiple wounded. They can't break contact. On the screens, one vehicle smoldered, its frame twisted, the crew trapped inside. Another tried to reverse, only to be slammed by another explosion. The trap was absolute, and the pattern in it gnawed at Vance's gut. It was too familiar. The timing, the spacing, the very angles of fire, she had seen this before, trained it, lived it. Her chest went tight, not with fear, with recognition. This was her language. Her pulse slowed. The noise of the TOC fell away. She didn't hear the frantic typing, the clipped voices, the shouts of desperation. She heard only the rhythm of the ambush. The way each volley wasn't just meant to kill, but to push. Heard, corner, break. And beneath it, she heard the whisper of a signature, a design too sharp to be coincidence. Someone out there knew what she knew. Rossi turned, desperation in her eyes. "Ma'am," she stopped herself, realizing she didn't even know what she was asking. Vance's voice was low, steady. "They're not irregulars, they're trained." Maddox froze mid-order, snapping his head toward her. His face was pale. "What did you say?" "Doctrine," she said, her voice flat. "That canyon isn't an ambush site, it's a killing field, textbook. Whoever set this up, they've done it before." The colonel's throat worked. His pride wanted to dismiss her, but the look in her eyes, not sharp, not focused, but cold with certainty, stopped him. Rossi's voice broke through again. "They're calling for fire support. They're running out of time." Maddox slammed a hand against the console. "Where the hell are my Apache?" "8 minutes out, sir," an operator replied. 8 minutes? The convoy had maybe 2. Vance stood. The shift in her movement was like a knife cutting through the TOC. Every head turned. Soldiers stiffened. Maddox's lips parted, the words caught in his throat. She didn't ask this time. She didn't demand. She simply spoke as though the decision had already been made. "Give me the roof." The silence was absolute. Maddox's face twisted. Rage, desperation, then, finally, resignation. "Arm her," he barked. The armorer moved fast this time, his hands no longer trembling but purposeful. The Barrett was brought again, heavy, absolute. She slung it with the same ease, the same calm. Rossi was already moving, snatching up her scope and rangefinder, her face pale but determined. The two of them climbed the ladder. Again, soldiers followed, drawn not by curiosity this time, but by something different, by belief. The desert wind tore at them as they hit the roof. Dust burned their eyes. Smoke curled on the horizon, a black scar against the sun. Vance dropped the rifle to the parapet, locking its bipod into place. She didn't waste time opening her case this time. It was already strapped to her side. The glasses snapped into place, the lenses gleaming, the projectors locking onto her pupils. And the world opened. The canyon bloomed before her, not a smear of gray and smoke, but a map of detail. Heat signatures glowing faintly against stone, muzzle flashes muted but traceable, shadows hiding patterns that the naked eye couldn't see. She breathed once. Rossi steadied the rangefinder. Her voice was tight. Main fire team 12 o'clock 900 meters, suppression fire, RPG team moving south ridge, range 1250. The soldiers behind them watched, their breaths caught, their disbelief from before burned into reverence. Vance's voice cut like steel. They're not insurgents, they're operators. The words carried weight. Rossi glanced at her, confusion and fear in her eyes. Operators, you mean? Like me. The silence that followed was heavier than the roar of the Barrett when it fired. The shot split the air, slammed into the canyon wall. A body dropped, the thermal glow vanishing. She worked the bolt, smooth, automatic, not hurried, never hurried. Another shot, another glow extinguished. The radio screamed with relief. They're falling back, pressure easing. But Vance didn't stop. Her lenses tracked the ridge, filtered the shimmer of heat, caught the smallest shift of shadow. She was hunting them the way they hunted. And she could feel it, the pushback. Because one of them was hunting her too. The next flash came angled, perfect, not at the convoy but at the ridge above her. The round slammed stone, shards scattering across the roof. Soldiers ducked. Rossi flinched. But Vance stayed still, her face unreadable, her voice low. They know I'm here. Her breath slowed. For the first time, the enemy hadn't underestimated the woman with the blurred eyes. They knew her. Her finger hovered over the trigger, her body calm, but inside something shifted. The ghosts she had buried weren't just chasing her anymore. They were staring straight back at her, rifles in hand. And she knew this wasn't chance, this wasn't random. Someone out there knew her name. What happens when the shot aimed at you isn't just metal, but memory. The canyon lay stretched wide under the burning sky. Smoke curled from the convoy wrecks. Distant figures scrambled for cover. But for Vance, none of it mattered. The world had narrowed. One scope. One line of sight. One enemy. Her breath slowed. Her pulse softened. Behind her, soldiers whispered in awe or fear, but their voices were gone. The only sound that mattered was the echo of a rifle that wasn't hers. She had felt the last shot cut toward her. Too clean, too deliberate, not suppression, not random, a message. They know I'm here, she murmured. Rossi knelt beside her, adjusting the rangefinder with trembling hands. Ma'am, they're shifting positions, 2 shooters at least, moving west ridge, range 1300. Vance didn't look at her. She didn't need to. The data poured through her lenses, the faint thermal signatures pulsing against stone, the unnatural cold spots of camo blankets masking heat. 2 shooters, professionals, coordinated, and the precision of their fire. It wasn't insurgent chaos. It was the language of training, the same language she spoke. Her lips pressed tight, inside something twisted. This wasn't war, this was reflection. She settled behind the Barrett, her cheek resting against the stock. Her body stilled, her breathing shallow. Her eyes narrowed through the scope, the world contracting into angles, drift, shimmer. Click, she adjusted for wind. Click, spin, drift. Rossi's voice cracked softly. They're targeting you. Vance's reply was calm, almost detached. Of course they are. She squeezed. The rifle roared. Dust exploded. The round crossed the canyon in 2 seconds of silence before ripping a figure off the ridge. Rossi gasped. Relief shot through the soldiers watching, but Vance didn't move, didn't celebrate. She just reset, shifted her aim. Because the second shooter was already sliding into place. The crack came, sharp, heavy. The round tore stone a foot from her position, shards slicing her cheek. Blood welled, trickled warm, she didn't flinch. She whispered to herself, almost inaudible, he's testing range. Her head tilted. Memory pressed in like a hand on her throat. The cadence, the spacing, the methodical patience. This wasn't just any operator. This was someone trained the way she had been trained. Someone who had walked the same corridors, heard the same words drilled into bone. A ghost from Project Chimera. Her fingers curled around the trigger, but her chest felt heavier than the rifle. She had buried that part of herself, buried the name Angel One, but the canyon whispered it back to her with every echo of the enemy's rifle. Angel One. And if she was Angel One, who was he? Rossi's voice tugged at the edge of her focus. Range 1350, crosswind rising. He's repositioning, ma'am, he's. Vance cut her off gently. I know. Her breathing slowed further, her heartbeat a steady drum in her ears. She could feel him out there, the way you feel a predator across the dark. Her mind sketched the arc of his fire, his timing, his restraint. Professional, patient, calculated. Just like her. The duel stretched into silence, the canyon waiting. She adjusted her scope by a fraction, shifted her body weight. Her eyes flickered across shimmer and shadow until they found it, the faintest imperfection in the cold mask of a rock outcropping. A mistake, subtle, barely there, but a mistake nonetheless. Got you, she whispered. She fired. The Barrett's roar shook the roof. The recoil slammed her shoulder. 2 seconds of silence stretched, then stone erupted on the far ridge. Dust, fragments, and a shape tumbling backward. Rossi exhaled like she'd been drowning. Soldiers behind them erupted with low cheers, adrenaline-fueled relief. But Vance didn't smile. She didn't relax. She stared through the scope, unblinking, her voice flat. Not him. The roof went quiet. Rossi blinked, confused. Ma'am, you hit. Not him, Vance repeated, her tone like steel. Because she knew. The shot had taken someone, but not the one she was dueling. That one was still out there, watching her, learning her. And she could feel it. Even without seeing him, he was smiling. The next round didn't come immediately. It came later, slower, deliberate. It slammed into stone inches above her head, close enough to rain grit across her scope. A taunt. Her jaw clenched. Her finger hovered on the trigger. She could sense him now, the way you sense your own shadow. It wasn't random insurgency. It wasn't war. It was recognition. A ghost calling to a ghost. The thought pierced her like ice. What if this wasn't just chance? What if he knew who she was? What if the ambush wasn't about convoys or supply lines, but about drawing her out? Her chest tightened. Because if that was true, she hadn't just been rediscovered by her own base. She had been found by those who were never supposed to find her again. She pulled back from the scope, her glasses humming softly as the data feed dimmed. Her face was pale, streaked with grit and blood. Rossi looked at her wide-eyed. Ma'am. Vance's voice came quiet, heavy with something the corporal had never heard in her before. Not calm, not control, something darker. He knows me. The words hung in the desert wind, heavier than the thunder of rifles. Behind them, Maddox's voice crackled through comms, demanding updates, but neither of them answered. Because the truth wasn't something Maddox was ready to hear. The convoy was still trapped. The ridge still burned with muzzle flashes. The battle wasn't over. But for Vance, something else had begun. This wasn't just a fight for the convoy. It was a duel with her own reflection, a past she had buried clawing itself back into daylight. And in that moment, she knew the truth she didn't want to admit. This wasn't going to end with one canyon, one ambush, one duel. This was only the beginning. What do you do when silence follows the shot? When victory doesn't feel like triumph, but like a door cracking open to something worse? The canyon was quiet now. The convoy limped back under cover of smoke, wounded loaded onto makeshift stretchers, survivors hollow-eyed, their bodies moving on adrenaline and fear. Medevac birds came in low, stirring the sand into clouds that stung every exposed face. To the base it looked like success. They had saved lives, they had survived. But for Vance, the silence pressed heavier than the chaos had. Because silence wasn't relief, silence was waiting. On the roof, she packed the Barrett with the same precise economy she always did. Each movement smooth, deliberate. No wasted gestures. Her glasses hummed softly as she disengaged them, folding the lenses back into their case. When she lifted her head, her squint returned, the world once again a blur of too much light, too much noise. But her mind still saw him. The second shooter, the real one, the ghost she hadn't killed. He was out there and he had let her know it. Not with words, not with comms, with the way his round had cracked stone inches from her face, close enough to taste the grit. A warning, a greeting. Or maybe a challenge. Rossi hovered beside her, silent, unsettled. The young corporal had steadied herself through firefights before, but what she had witnessed today was different. It wasn't combat. It wasn't chaos. It was something colder, sharper. When Vance finally rose, Rossi followed. Neither spoke. They descended the ladder into the TOC, the air heavy with relief and exhaustion. Operators glanced at Vance as she passed, their faces carrying a new weight. Respect, yes, but also unease. They had seen her fight ghosts, and for the first time, they wondered if maybe she was one herself. Colonel Maddox stood at the center of it all, barking orders, directing triage, coordinating QRF withdrawals. But when his eyes found her, his voice faltered, just for a heartbeat. He dismissed his staff, cleared the air, and then approached her. His face was tight, jaw clenched, eyes pale and searching. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. His tone wasn't the bark of a commander now, it was the rasp of a man trying to understand. Vance said nothing. Maddox stepped closer, his voice low. "That wasn't an ambush, that wasn't insurgents. You and I both know it." Still she stayed silent, her expression unreadable, her squint betraying nothing. He exhaled sharply, frustration cutting through him. "You knew, didn't you, from the first shot? That wasn't random fire, that was doctrine." Her lips parted, her voice was quiet, steady. It was chimera. The word hung in the room like smoke. Maddox's eyes widened, the air seeming to drain from his chest. "Impossible," he muttered. "Chimera gone, disbanded, wiped." But his voice betrayed him. He didn't believe his own words. Vance tilted her head, so was I. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the hum of servers and the faint crackle of radios. Finally Maddox spoke again, his voice bitter. "If Chimera's in play out here, then this isn't just a fight. This is a message. And you," he paused, his gaze hardening, "you're the message." Her chest tightened, but she didn't show it. She had known deep down from the moment she heard the cadence of those shots. It wasn't chance. It wasn't luck. It was intent. And intent meant someone out there had remembered her name. The following days moved with uneasy rhythm. The base resumed its grind, patrols, convoys, shifts on the wire, but an invisible weight pressed on every man and woman inside the walls. The desert felt closer, the mountains sharper, every shadow deeper. And Vance, she felt their eyes more than ever, not mocking now, not pitying, watching, waiting. They didn't ask outright, but she could feel the question every time she walked past. Who is she really? What else is she hiding? She gave them nothing, sat in her corner, typed reports, squinted at blurred screens. But when night fell, when the TOC quieted, Rossi would drift near, sometimes with coffee, sometimes without. The corporal's voice was always careful, as though stepping too close to a wire. "Ma'am," she said one night, her tone hushed, "you said it was Chimera." Vance didn't look up. Her fingers tapped a slow rhythm on the keys. Rossi hesitated, then pushed. "That's you, isn't it? You were part of them." The pause stretched, long, heavy. Finally Vance's voice came, low, quiet. "Once." Rossi's chest tightened. The stories she'd overheard in barracks, the whispered myths about a unit that never officially existed, they all coiled together in that single word. "You think it's them," Rossi whispered, "out there." "I don't think," Vance said softly. "I know." Rossi swallowed. Fear flickered in her eyes, not of Vance, of the idea that if Chimera was out there, then the desert wasn't just dangerous, it was haunted. And then Vance said something that chilled her deeper. "They're not hunting convoys, they're hunting me." The words cracked like glass in the silence. For Rossi, the revelation landed like weight in her chest. If that was true, then everything that had happened, the sniper duel, the canyon ambush, wasn't about the war at all. It was personal. And if the enemy knew who Vance was, then the base itself was in the crosshairs, caught in a war it didn't even understand. Days turned into nights, nights into days. The desert pressed closer. Every patrol felt like bait. Every silence on the comms felt like a storm waiting to break. Vance walked the perimeter more often now. Soldiers on watch saluted stiffly, their eyes heavy with the kind of respect that bordered on fear. She mapped the ground with each step, her mind cataloging sightlines, wind shifts, soil density, angles of shadow. She knew the duel wasn't finished. It had only begun. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the ridges, Rossi walked with her along the wire. The young corporal's face was pale, but her voice steady. "Why you?" she asked quietly. "Why now?" Vance's eyes narrowed against the glare. "Because ghosts don't stay buried, not forever." Her voice carried no bitterness, just acceptance. They walked in silence for a long moment before Rossi asked the question she hadn't dared until now. "Are you scared?" The pause was long. Vance's head tilted slightly, her expression unreadable. Finally she answered, "Fear isn't the problem, hope is." Rossi frowned. "Hope?" Vance's lips pressed tight. "Hope that maybe this ends without me being what I was. Hope that maybe I can still just be forgotten." Her words drifted into the desert wind, soft but heavy, a confession she hadn't spoken aloud until now. Because she knew the truth. Soon the desert would demand her again, not as Vance, not as the squinting woman in the corner, but as the ghost they had all thought was gone. Angel 1. What do you do when the ghost finally steps out of the shadows? It began the way storms always begin in the desert, not with thunder, with silence. The TOC buzzed with its normal rhythm when the first call came in. A patrol missing. Then another report, radio silence. Then the flicker of static, sharp and wrong, cutting across frequencies that should have been clear. It wasn't insurgents. Insurgents didn't jam nets. Insurgents didn't move with surgical precision, leaving no trace but silence. The room stiffened. Maddox barked orders, but his voice was tighter now, the edges fraying. He already knew. Vance knew too. She stood slowly from her desk, her blurred eyes drifting toward the screens. Her chest tightened. She could feel it before the reports even clarified. This wasn't random. This wasn't routine. This was a hand reaching out of her past, pulling, dragging. And she knew what it meant. The duel wasn't waiting anymore. The duel had come for her. The drone feed caught it first. A small rise north of the base, jagged rock and shadow, movement faint. Heat signatures too disciplined to be militia. Positions staggered, deliberate. An encirclement, not of the base, of her. Her breath slowed. Rossi's voice shook as she relayed, "Ma'am, it's them, it's." "I know." The word stopped her cold. Maddox turned, his face pale. "Vance, what are we dealing with?" Her head tilted. Her squint tightened. And then, for the first time, she said it aloud, clear enough for everyone in the TOC to hear. "Chimera." The word dropped like a stone in water, ripples cutting through every man and woman in the room. Some had heard it only in rumor, some not at all, but they all felt its weight. Maddox swallowed hard. Why now?" Vance's voice was flat. "Because I'm still alive." The truth hung there heavy. It wasn't about convoys or patrols. It was about her. They hadn't forgotten her. They had been waiting for her. And now they had come to finish the story. Maddox's face twisted with conflict. "If you're right, if it really is Chimera." They won't stop, Vance cut him off. Not until I'm gone or they are. The silence that followed was absolute. Everyone in the room knew what it meant. This wasn't the base's fight, it was hers. She reached for the Pelican case under her desk, snapped it open. The gleaming optic system stared back at her like an old wound. She lifted it, settled it onto her face and blinked once. The world snapped into terrifying clarity. When she stood, no one stopped her, not even Maddox. The roof was waiting. Rossi followed, pale but unshaking, the spotter's kit clutched to her chest. Tanaka trailed too, his face rigid, his shame long since transformed into something harder, resolve. The desert wind hit them as they climbed. The sun burned low, orange bleeding into purple. The rocks north of the base glowed faint in her optics. She dropped the Barrett onto the parapet, clicked its bipod into place. Her body moved with the precision of ritual. Then she waited. The silence stretched, the base held its breath. And then across the ridge, the first shot came. Not at the base, not at a patrol, at her. The round slammed stone inches from her shoulder, dust stinging her face. Rossi flinched. Tanaka ducked, but Vance didn't move. Her lips barely parted. He's here. Her rival, the shadow she'd felt in the canyon, the ghost of Chimera. Her scope swept the ridgeline. Her lenses flickered data, wind, drift, shimmer. Then she saw it, not heat, not flash, a void, a shadow too perfect, a blanket too still. She adjusted, click, click. Her breath held. She fired. The Barrett's roar cracked the sky, 2 seconds of silence. Then stone exploded. A figure rolled, tumbling from cover. But even as Rossi gasped, Vance's face stayed cold. Not him. Another shot came, cleaner, sharper, slamming stone near her scope. She exhaled slowly. This was the duel, not the canyon, not the convoy, this. She knew his rhythm now, his patience, his calculation. He wasn't just trained like her, he was her. The base had fallen silent. Every operator, every soldier crowded below, watching through feeds, holding breath as if their lungs belonged to her. She adjusted again, her body still as stone. She didn't hunt the shot, she hunted the absence, the one shadow too precise. And then she saw it, a flicker, a shift in void. Her body moved without thought, her finger tightened. The rifle roared. 2 seconds. Impact. The radio crackled with a voice not of relief but awe. Target down, confirmed. The ridge is clear. Rossi let out a shuddering breath, her shoulders slumping. Tanaka whispered under his breath, almost like a prayer. But Vance didn't move, didn't celebrate. She stared through her scope, eyes unblinking. Because in that silence she felt it. Not victory, recognition. This hadn't been a hunt, it had been a test. And she knew, in her marrow, there were more. The desert wasn't finished with her. Chimera wasn't finished. But for tonight, the ridge was silent. She packed the Barrett, each piece locked away with the calm of someone who had done this 1,000 times. The glasses folded back into their case. The world blurred again. She rose, her shoulders straight, her body calm but her face unreadable. They descended the ladder. The TOC fell silent as she entered, every eye turning. No one whispered now. No one dared. Colonel Maddox stood waiting, his pale eyes locked on hers. For a moment the weight of everything pressed between them, his authority, her secret, their shared survival. And then, for the second time, Maddox did what no colonel should. He saluted. Slow, deliberate, final. This time the gesture wasn't apology. It was acknowledgement, not just of what she'd done but of what she was. She didn't return it, she didn't need to. Instead, she gave the smallest nod, a quiet dignity that spoke louder than any word. The night settled heavy over Paragan. Generators hummed, radios buzzed, the base breathed again. But nothing was the same. Tanaka took his post on the tower, scanning the darkness with new eyes. Rossi sat at her console, her focus sharper, steadier. Maddox stood in his office, staring at a blank wall, haunted by truths he would never write into a report. And Vance. She sat once more at her corner desk. The screen blurred, the noise of the TOC washing around her like tide. To anyone watching, she was just a woman squinting at logistics reports, a forgotten analyst, a non-factor. But under her cot, the Pelican case glowed faint in the light, a reminder, a promise. She sipped the coffee Rossi had left her, let the warmth spread through her chest. And in that small, quiet moment, she felt something the desert could never take. Not triumph, not recognition. Dignity. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, doesn't beg. Dignity that simply acts.